Claude-Hélène Mayer, a professor in industrial and organizational psychology at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa, presents her talk on the topic Love in Sub-Saharan African Contexts. Claude-Hélène Mayer is a professor in industrial and organizational psychology at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. Her research areas include women in leadership, transcultural mental health, shame, and love across cultures. She has won 2 Nautilus Silver Awards with special honors for academic work on women empowerment for a sustainable future, and for her authored book, Unwrapping Transcultural Romantic Love Relationships. Claude-Hélène has been highly interested in emotions and culture since the 1990s. Love, as a complex emotion, is one of the fascinating topics that she enjoys researching, even in culture-specific settings. She is the winner of the William B. Guddekunst Book Award 2023, along with Elizabeth Vanderheiden and 6 other co-editors, for the book International Handbook of Love, Transcultural and Transdisciplinary Perspectives. Today, she will give a talk on the topic, Love in Sub-Saharan African Contexts. In this keynote, she emphasizes the importance of focusing on culture-specific influences on love and love concepts by exploring love in sub-Saharan African contexts.
I'm very glad to be here. Although I couldn't be part of the conference in person, I was online several times and listened to the contributions, and I really enjoyed it. Today, I'm going to talk about love in sub-Saharan African contexts, and I hope you are going to enjoy my presentation. We've got 45 minutes. And kicking off this little talk, I would like to mention this proverb from South Africa. It is, "Love, like rain, does not choose the grass on which it falls." And as you will see, as I'm going to take you along my talk today, you will see that this is also coming out of my talk today, this message. So how it all started, how did I go into love research? Actually, I was working as a therapist and intercultural family therapist. And people always ask me, you are a researcher and a therapist. Now tell me what happened and what went actually wrong in my love relationships. And this was several years ago. And then I started to go deeper into the topic and to research it. And also going back to one of the first books I read about Erich Fromm and the art of loving, which I really enjoyed. So always coming back to the very primary aspects of love as well. So I started to ask the question, how is this art of loving and love actually constructed and reconstructed across cultures, interculturally and transculturally? And my focus on African context derives from me living on the African continent since the 1990s. And I've studied African cultures from the 1990s onwards and psychology at the same time. And so I was really interested in exploring this concept in the context where I'm working and living actually a little bit more. The presentation is supposed to be about Southern Africa. However, I will only show you some aspects from South Africa today because it was just far too much information for only 45 minutes. So like many psychologists before me, I started actually when I tried to get a little bit more into the topic of love by asking my children. And I hope you can hear the voice now. And I asked my other son.
Sorry, I'm afraid we couldn't hear.
Okay,
I think it's muted. I think it's muted. If you could play back.
I tried to share the audio, but obviously maybe it's not working, but you will just be able to read it. I'm asking the question, what is love for you? And he answered, what you can read here, then I don't need to play it maybe. Let me think. Love is something what your parents give you. And then I asked my daughter, what is love for you? And she said, love is when everyone likes everyone. And I actually have no clue what love means. I just say love is like when someone likes anyone. And if you're familiar with the philosophy of love, often these 3 aspects are mentioned, the community and the universal concept of love, then the family concept of love, and the inter or intrapersonal concepts of love. And I moved forward. And I asked myself, how does culture actually impact on our concepts and experiences of love? And which concepts of love do people in African contexts prefer? And why do they actually prefer them? So this keynote today is about providing a little bit of an insight into the discourses on love in Southern Africa, and especially in South Africa, because I'm going to show you also my recent findings from a recent study that I started to do last year, which goes across different countries, but I only got to the point where I really looked at the South African data set so far. The presentation aims to sharpen the culture-specific lens on love concepts in Southern Africa and provide a little bit of space for amical voices and perspectives, and especially show the heterogeneity of love concept in this specific context. So when you're looking at the African continent, we have got at the moment 54 countries in Africa, at least according to the United Nations. And we are only going in this study to look at Southern Africa. And Southern Africa includes the green part, which you can see here in the map, also called Sub-Saharan Africa. And in our research at the moment, we are predominantly looking at two larger groups in Southern Africa. And these are the Niger-Congo A groups and Niger-Congo B groups, the so-called Bantu-speaking ethnic groups within Southern Africa. However, as I said, today I'm just referring to the South African data. At the moment in South Africa, we've got about 61 million inhabitants, and I'm just giving you a bit of insight to really maybe understand the data set and the findings also a little bit from in depth. And we are dealing with an apartheid legacy. That means that since 1994, South Africa is called the post-apartheid state, and apartheid was finished at that point in time. And this year we actually celebrate 30 years of post-apartheid in South Africa. And during apartheid, we had four groups that were classified by the apartheid regime. These were the African or blacks. They've got 81.2% at the moment. Then coloreds, these are people of mixed origin from different countries, from ranging from Malaysia to European countries, but also African indigenous countries. Then the Indian population, Indian South African, makes at the moment 2.7%, and whites hold a percentage of 7.3% at the moment in South Africa. As you can imagine, all of these groups are very diverse in themselves. The African ethnic groups, the biggest group are the Zulu, followed by the Xhosa and the Sotho. And then we've got 11 official languages at the moment in South Africa, and we just added a 12th one. And our religion in South Africa is mainly Christian religion with 85.3%. Also African traditional religions, 7.8%, Muslim 1.6%, Hindu 1.1%, and other religions that fall under the 1%. Then we've got about 2.9% being so-called without a religion. As you can see, we've got a very high diversity of cultures within the South African context. Now, when we are looking at love research in this context, how do we define love? And I decided to define it very broadly. Love is a complex, fluid cultural concept which changes over time and across societies and cultures, and which has been described from different disciplinary and cultural perspectives. So our first interviewee here, describing what love means to him, to his girlfriend. So this is what it is to be in love. 2 years later, I think about you more than I did when I first met you. I smile like crazy when I think about being with you. Stop what I'm doing and just stand there and think about the way you smile. When I lay in bed alone, I wish I was holding you. When I'm walking, I wish you were beside me. When I'm talking, I wish you were listening. When it's too quiet, I wish you were talking. So this is what it's like to be in love with you. It's more than nice. It's the nicest. It's the best. It's more than best. It's the best. And you can always see in the corner what kind of cultural background this person has. Now, looking into love research in African context, we can see that in the literature, we speak about a devaluation of African culture in general, and especially when it comes to African love concepts and also concepts of sexuality. And I'll go a little bit deeper into that, because when we look at the anthropological literature studying sexuality in Africa and love, we can see that often it has been referred to in the past as sexual life of the savages in Africa, and that this kind of research has often been used to really exploit African cultures through knowledge of the social system knowledge. And this was in the past century the case and is now being reversed, and especially looking at the fact that a lot of more people from the emic point of cultures are doing love research now in African context. So love is a constitutive of African sexuality and has often been ignored to perpetuate racist and biased perceptions. And we can see that up to today in the literature, and that there's a whole discussion on that. So when we are looking into the research, we can see that love is often connected to danger and also to sexuality in a kind of exploitative way, with regard to violence in love relationship, with regard to diseases like HIV and AIDS, especially in Sub-Saharan African context. We can see that there's an absence of research on love, romance, and excitement, and especially from positive psychology perspective. And this is why we often tried, my colleague Elisabeth van der Heijden and I, to look at love concepts from this point of view, also in African context. So love in the historical context of domination, of fear, of unequal laws and resistance has often been mentioned within the South African context, especially because love and marriage relationships were dominated by the apartheid laws and people were not allowed to marry across cultures. And we can see that Bell Hooks, for example, only 24 years ago said, fear and desire for separation. We can see that in our individual relationships. The safety lies within the sameness. The difference is often perceived as a threat in love relationships, and there's an alienation on personal and political levels. And we are still seeing that in South Africa today. So we can also see that there is research on how love and sexuality actually connect, and that sex does not necessarily encompass love, but love does encompass sex, for example. We see a lot of research on boys and girls because we often struggle with HIV/AIDS in these age groups. So a lot of love research has gone into adolescence research, how boys, for example, define love, how girls define love, how they see each other, how they keep up their relationships, when do they break up, and all of these aspects are mentioned in this kind of research. The question was asked, when does actually love appear in these kind of young relationships? When there is, for example, good sex, material wealth, and faithfulness, and when love is a better path to a better life. Also, we can see in the literature that often in African context, we say that love needs development. Love doesn't appear at first sight, but we have to be together and live our life together to really love. And we can also see that love is very much connected to different kind of gender concepts for girls and for boys, women and men. And I'll go a bit deeper into that just now. Then we can see that love in research, and here I give you some points of Modelli from 2013, has included, often in African context, emotional intimacy, fantasies about romance, desire and sex. Having a good time is very important also in these kind of relationships. Then girls often mention in the adolescence research that love and sex can happen before marriage, although often we can see in different societies that actually you have to be married to have sex. Love does not need to lead to marriage, but love relationships need to be engaging and romantic. And this is what boys often say. And we can also see this topic coming up in our research study at the moment. There's an equality of women and men to a certain degree, and several authors have highlighted that there needs to be more equality between men and women. However, it is also a discourse if this is rather a Western point of view or an African emic point of view, that equality needs to happen in South African or Southern African love relationships to actually create connectedness and satisfaction. We can also see in the literature that women often stay in violent relationships, and violence is a big issue, especially in South Africa, in interpersonal relationships and family relationships. And we can see that women often choose to stay in these kind of relationships for many years, although they actually look in love relationships for respect and dignity, especially also for kindness, that is also sometimes mentioned in the research. And we can see that research, for example, by Pavlu, has highlighted in terms of the cultural backgrounds and love, that Black and Indian concepts of love are collectivistic, while white and colored concepts of love are rather individualistic. However, I'm not so sure about this result. It comes from a quantitative study, and I'm actually not really sure if this is really the case 15 or 16 years after the study has been conducted. So many of these studies look at young individuals, and not so many look at love concepts over the whole lifespan. And we actually wanted to include in our study people from all different walks of life and age groups. And this is what we did. So we can also see that when you are researching love in African cultures, and that might be also a preview on tomorrow's teaching class in the morning, there are quite a lot of challenges involved. And Madeli has, for example, said that the conception of love changes constantly and needs to be re-evaluated and evaluated constantly as well. So 5 years ago, love concepts, even across a society, might be very different to the one they are today. And love is a topic which falls within the private sphere, and people might not actually want to share it openly with others or talk about it. So my experiences within the past 8 years were actually a little bit similar. However, being a foreigner within African context, I was never really perceived as somebody intruding the private space, but rather I was invited to come and ask questions about love concepts with open arms, because I was perceived as an outsider, and this is my own interpretation, and people could just easily open up to me, especially because I didn't belong to any of the predefined apartheid groups. So I did a lot of research on love with people I know or I have known, and also with people I didn't know at all. And I could see that the degree of openness were similar all the time. So people were really open to speak about their love relationships over years. We can also see that often it's a challenge that people refer to Western concepts of love, especially Hollywood concepts of love, or traditional concepts, or new South African or African concepts of love, more postmodern concepts. And this is then always a challenge. How do we classify these kind of concepts now? So when we are looking at the research methodology, what we did, we used a hermeneutical interpretative paradigm. We adapted the idea of Giddens' social reflexivity, always reflecting of what our interviewees have said. We used interviews in Southern African context. I'm only presenting on South Africa today, only from 12 interviews, because I thought I'd rather show you more content than breadth. I talked to 6 male, 6 female individuals between 31 years and 68 years, and 7 of them were Black, 3 Hindu and 1 white, and I so far haven't spoken in this kind of research with colored individuals so far. However, all my observations of the past 15 years come into this play as well. And I used content analysis together with my assistants, and we had ethical approval from my university, used qualitative quality criteria, and surely we have got limitations in qualitative research. So it is not to be generalized as such. The aim was really to explore the contemporary concept of love across cultures and go into depth and really understand, going beyond the stereotypes of what individualistic or collectivistic might mean in the context, to understand. And our research questions included: what are the contemporary concepts of love? What makes partners attractive in love relationships? What cultural aspects play a role, and when does love lead to marriage? And what are the expressions and symbols of love in these contexts? And I hope you're excited to look at a few of our findings. So for the first question, what are actually love concepts? We can see here from a Black African female saying, for me, love is more signs and commitments. It's a commitment to your partner. It's commitment to the end goal, whatever that goal is for these people. And it's committing to each other to keep each other on that track to fulfilling that goal. So to me, that is what love is. So clearly we've got a vision of the relationship here included, plus a goal that the couple sets for themselves, and the commitment to really strive towards the same direction. Another Black African female says in Zulu, and she is Zulu, it's like utando, which means love in Zulu. It's love. Like when you call your partner, you will call them umuntu wami, my person. When you refer to your children, abangane inzangane. So we can see, according to the relationships you've got, we've got different concepts of love. And she goes on saying, we have long version names in Africa, but when you have a personal relationship with people, they start referring to your nickname. So it's also like a sentiment of love. And you can see that in everyday relationships. If somebody calls you by your real long name, you're in trouble. So further, a Black African female says, love, I would say, is a feeling of a deep connection. So connection is the key word here. To somebody, so much so that you would probably do things for them that you wouldn't do for other people. And the concept of doing love is very much highlighted in many of our interviews. I recognize that my whole concept of love is probably very much Westernized, because I think, being raised by my parents, they were not very traditional people as well. And we've seen that over years in love research in African context so far, that often we cannot clearly differentiate anymore between collectivist and individualist Western and African concepts anymore. And an Indian South African female says, for me, love is a verb. It's an action, and it's a willingness and a commitment to stay together in service of the relationship. But at the same time, I've evolved that word. Just because you are with someone, it doesn't mean that you need to stay with them until you die, which is basically the culture that I was raised in, is that the person you marry is you stay in that relationship until you die. And we can see that these relationships have really changed through the generations and how they are interpreted. Here are some male comments of Black African male. The one says, love means happiness, and love is actions, meaning doing something for someone. And the other one says, but I find very hard to engage with one that is the opposite of my mom. My mom she served us all. So when I look at a woman, I see that that's one thing I'm looking for a lot. So love relationships, and we see that quite a lot, especially from male individuals with Black African background, that they often connect the wife or the girlfriend's attitudes, behaviors, mannerism to the mother's. So concepts of love include commitment, familiarity and intimacy, knowing the other person, getting to know them. It is discussed in the data. We cannot actually love somebody we do not know. Deep connection is very important. By loving someone, you give this someone a privilege, because you would do more for this person than for any other person. It is also connected to an eternal closeness, being together and staying together even beyond dying and death. Care, compassion, and understanding are very important concepts in love concepts in African context. Vulnerability and emotion, mentioned especially by male Black African interview partners. Happiness, only mentioned by male interview partners, and a wife like a mother, mentioned by male Black African interviewees. When we are looking now at what makes people attractive or why are they attracted to each other, Black male Africans say here the body, the face, the look, or the clothes they wear. Only afterwards, we are looking more into the thoughts, the communication style, how people talk, how they talk to us, and the mannerism they display. But also what they say is that the more attention a woman pays to them, and the more submission she might display, the more love might be involved. So here you just see a little comment again of a Black male African person who says and describes that the attraction was physical in the first instance, because you see a person from far away, you are attracted to how she looks, and only later you get to know what she eats, for example, and that is an important aspect, food and eating in the interviews around love. So you need to know what a person eats to love this person as well. And often men describe in the interviews over several research studies I've done how important the food is women can prepare for them, especially in Black African culture. Then we see what attracts actually Black African females to male partners. They must be smart and convincing. They must convince and draw you into their talks and really catch your attention. They must be protective and humorous. They need to know jokes and must make you being able to laugh with them as well. But they also should be humble and showing humility. And several of the women say that it is very important that they've got similar value sets and that their actions contribute to make the world a better place, society, and that they've got a strong self-worth whilst being humble. So this lady who is speaking here, a Black African female, she says around the age of 40, she says that she's actually from a very wealthy background and her husband is not. And she said, so all of that, his friends would tell him that your woman going to leave you because your woman is a cheese girl. So we got money at home. That's how they said it. You know, I'm a cheese girl. I got money at home. She's not going to last with people like us. You know what I mean? And we ended up lasting. Sorry for that. We ended up lasting. So it kind of like transcended as opposed to socioeconomics. And that is a very important aspect in love relationships in African context, always highlighted that women usually look out for the better deal. You find it in the literature and we also found it in the research. And a very important aspect. So her husband always highlighted that she must have been given to him by the ancestors so that she really stayed with him, and they've got several children together. Indian South African males say, there was no attraction. I was introduced by my relatives or my parents. It was about maturity, about thoughtfulness, connection, similar goals. And all the female Indian women who I interviewed were all between 40 and 50 years old. They all were divorced at least once or twice. And they actually went all through a huge shift, going from the traditional to the more postmodern ways of living as they describe it themselves. So wealth and gifts were very important, but now it's more spirituality. And one says here, the reason that I made the choices came from a very disempowered perspective. So it wasn't that I particularly liked a specific thing or found the person attractive. It was never that it was always, oh, I feel so grateful that somebody is interested in me, which was a very sad way to look at it. So as you can see, self-worth also plays a role here. And when we are looking a little bit further into cultural aspects, which ones do play a role? For Africans, Black Africans, it is a lot about conflicts, misunderstanding across cultures with regard to lobola, how the negotiations of bride gifts actually were conducted, especially when they come from different ethnic backgrounds. There's a lot of conflict, how you say something, how you actually attract the other partner and so on. How the negotiations work, especially when the parents coming from different provinces. It is very crucial that they meet for at least 1, 2, 3, 5 days, and often it can go over months, and often they do not get married afterwards because the family couldn't get to a conclusion. Then often there's a non-acceptance of family members of the partner's culture or language group. That is a common theme in the cultural aspects playing a role in love relationships, because the parents speak a different language than the partner of the son or the daughter. And differences in gender roles and name giving, because usually in the ethnic groups, the names are given, in most of them, by the parents of the male partner. For Indian South African women, we can see there's a lot about tradition to marry within the Indian cultural group, language group, the caste system. Usually they don't like it. The new generation of the 20-year-olds now doesn't even look at these traditions anymore. We can see that also in the data. There are generational differences, especially in this group, in rituals between parents and also the women who are being married. There is a treatment of women in the relationships that is not valued very much as the woman described it. And it is very important to marry into a high social class. Love should be within this class. Wealth and richness are very important to love someone. And the white men in this research say love concept actually for them derives from Christianity, are very much or close to it. And that often in their cultural group, there is still a non-acceptance of homosexuality, especially in the traditional Afrikaans culture. When does love now lead to marriage, really? I wanted to find out, because I asked myself often when I saw people getting married or not getting married. And in a broader society, not getting married is still not really accepted. So usually in Black African culture, the man proposes to the family through a complex system. It involves love letters. You have to choose the right words like butterfly or flower, and we want to pluck the flower in your family, and so on. It's very lyric, often written. And especially in the Zulu culture, the women wear certain beads, and they make up like necklaces with certain beads to describe the love relationship between the couple according to the beads. And then a decision is being made by the family so that the couple can marry. But often we can also see that the parents accept offers of other families to marry their daughters in the Indian South African traditional culture. And sometimes the Indian daughters have not even seen the men who they are going to marry. Falling in love is more common now in an individual decision. For the younger generation of Indian South African, modern or postmodern concepts. And in the white South African group, we see it that often people marry after they have decided they want to marry on a couple base, and then they go to the parents and introduce the partner, and the parents still have quite a say in the choice of partner people bring home. We can also see that there are very many different expressions and symbols of love across the different South African cultures. We can see in the Indian South African culture that rings are very common, and that is also in relationship to the Western culture, but also the red dot on the forehead that you usually wear as a woman when you are married, and hugs and kisses in private express love. In the white South African culture, we see gifts like flowers and chocolate and jewelry are very important to express love. And also giving support to the other partner, for example, by bringing up the children, hugs, holding hands, or good deeds to do for the other partner are very important. Also, the good deeds are important in the Black African culture. It is mentioned very often, and also flowers and chocolate are important. Invitations to dine out, to go on outings, for example, to the beach or wherever you live. But also calling them nice names, again, is very important, like sweetie or sweetheart. And often English names are used in love relationships. Nice food is important, as I mentioned earlier on, spa days, support or good deeds. Lobola is very important, so the bride price still plays a very huge role in the relationship. Even in very highly Western educated individuals, the lobola does not miss usually. And then Zulu beads are important, love letters, and certain clothing aspects that women especially have to display, but also men sometimes, when they are in love and they are married. It is also mentioned that mother and father are actually the love symbols for individuals within especially Black African culture, and that only if you've had love from your mother and father, you will be able to love your partner again. And this is why the parents hold a special place in intimate relationships, because especially the wives or women have to look then also after the parents of the husband, especially in Black African culture. And only if this relationship is good, we speak of love. So the keynote aimed a little bit to look deeper into the discourses on Southern African culture, as much as you can do that in 45 minutes, giving you a little insight in the culture-specific concepts in Southern Africa, especially South Africa, and showing the diversity we can see already when we are just scratching on the surface of love concepts in South Africa, in one country with so many different ethnic groups. We can already see how diverse the love concepts are just in these 40 minutes. So coming to a conclusion, is love between or including Western and predominantly Hollywood cultures and diverse African cultural concepts become really complex. And when I ask individuals within either the interviews or in my daily life relationships, how do they differentiate their love concepts and how do they reflect on them? They always say it's like a patchwork of Western, of traditional African, and of modern, postmodern, post-apartheid concepts. And sometimes they even say apartheid concepts still come in because they feel they are not really allowed to love someone from a different racial group, as it is still called in South Africa. So it is very important for them to have reflective attitudes toward their individual love concepts, and we can see there are huge changes of love concepts across the generations, and we can see that there is a strong emancipation of women in love relationships, from very low self-esteem, here mentioned by Indian women, to a higher or at least neutral self-worth, which is becoming more important. And we can also see that in the Black African culture, where a lot of interviews, female interviews usually say that for them it's very important to have a high educational standard, working and being equal to the husband. So Black African love concepts are partly traditional in terms of lobola, name giving and family negotiations, but based on equality. And especially women highlight how important it is that these relationships are monogamous for both partners and both provide for the family. We can also see gender differences in defining attractiveness. The outer appearance is firstly mentioned by the male interviewees, not by the female ones. Internal values and personality play a huge important role, but also the development of the love concept whilst being together, searching or aiming for a vision and a common goal in these relationships. Often the socioeconomic status should be similar, but sometimes it is not. And then people try to work against it and ascribe it to an external force that these people can still be together. The cultural aspects are from traditional rituals to individuals' concepts of couple relationships. Often we see that changes in impact of family on individual lives differs in cultural groups, and also that there are ethnic differences amongst the Black African groups that really, really differ and often lead to misunderstanding. So my recommendations for future research, and we are just at the start of a new research project moving that further, is that we need really more and deeper insights. And we are often trying now to really include the indigenous language concepts of love in our research in different African contexts, rural areas, urban areas, and so on. And also looking at the exploration of the societal and historic impact on love relationships, which is obviously given in our context, and how Hollywood love impacts on the conduct of love relationship and how it is intermingled with the traditional concept. We look at gender-related research more and need to look at it across the lifespan and across the different generations. And looking at love and emancipation of women in violent and oppressive relationships is also part of our research, but not its focus. So staying a little bit in time, and I hope you've got some comments and questions. I thank you very much for listening and being here this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claude-Hélène, if I may. And
Sure.
we start with some questions here. Can you please? Okay. We're doing more or less fine with time.
All right.
Hi, Claude. Thank you very much for this enlightening exposition. I have one serious question, something I was really missing. I've lived in West Africa for a while, and there everything in life, and also love, is completely imbued by magic. Everything is magic. Women, by definition, in most of the Mande people, have spiritual force when they are born. It's called nyama. Men do not have it. They can acquire it if they retire from the village and live in the jungle for a number of days. And so love relations are prompted by this magic. A woman will look for a man who also has a bit of nyama, but not too much, because if he has too much, then she cannot dominate him. And this is in rural areas. She will wear a panya, a loincloth, which is full of magical systems, symbols that protect her, that emanate her power, etc. This power, however, is dangerous because people do not wear underwear, so female fluids permeate into the cloth. So you have to be very careful as a woman that you don't lose any of your clothing, because if somebody has access to your clothing, they have access to your nyama, to your power, and they can use it against you. So is this you see what I mean? All of life, everything in love is directed by this magic thinking. Is this something which is really totally absent in South Africa? I can hardly imagine it.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. It is very interesting what you're asking. Okay, we do have also magic coming into relationships and love relationships, and often they are coming into these relationships when the relationships do not work out well. So then people would go to somebody with magic powers rather to bring the lost lover back, for example, or to make the person more approachable and get access to the feelings and emotions. We do have that, and it has not been mentioned in the data set. And it is hardly ever mentioned when you do formal interviews. It is mentioned in daily interactions when you talk to individuals, and then it is mentioned, and no, it exists here, but if people are coming for a formal interview and you interview them, they would probably not mention it. And that is why they don't mention it, is because they want to show they have Western education. They are beyond this magical state. They are looking at it with a kind of Western reason. And this is, I guess, why it doesn't really come into the data set here. But no, it exists also in South Africa. I would say in comparison, because I lived for a few years in East Africa, I saw it much more. I lived also in the rural areas for 2 years, and there it was a part of daily life interactions and love relationships, but not so much in the urban settings of South Africa. I hope this answers your question. And I agree with you, it is there and it exists.
Yes, thank you very much. We have another question from Professor Rashmi Singla.
Yes. So good morning, and finally it's good to see you, because you've been editor of the book and we've been writing to each other. And of course, it's good to know about other parts of the world, and especially when there's this mixing that people of Indian origin are living in South Africa over ages. I have just two small questions, because while going through a description of persons of Indian origin or some other origin, you wrote the concept of privilege, that in the marriage there is privilege, and you didn't explain it much. So this was one aspect. The other aspect was when describing the Indians in South Africa, you wrote the word spirituality, that for them spirituality also matters. So these are the two concepts. I'll request you to go in some more detail about privilege in marriage, in the relationship, and about spirituality. So thanks.
Thank you very much,
Yes.
and good to seeing you.
Yeah, same here.
Okay. I must say, the Indian South Africans came as slaves to South Africa in the 19th century. So these are Indian women of the 7th, 8th, 9th generation, and they do not speak any Indian language any longer because they were kind of so-called naturalized, and they only speak English. They do not speak Hindu or any other Indian language where they are coming from. So just as in the cultural context. And yeah, they say, and privilege is mentioned by Black female and Indian female South Africans, that they say it is actually a privilege for the male counterparts or in the couple relationship that they get when a woman cooks for them or does something for them, whilst they expected actually on a societal or cultural base that men do that in any way because they are the providers in the relationship. And so that is very important as a statement from the woman in this research. So it's a privilege for them that the women are there for them, because being is a very important concept, and then also doing something for them, for the men. And spirituality was hardly mentioned, but it was only mentioned also again by Indian South Africans, female interviewees, and they said they do not necessarily refer to Hindu spiritualism because they grew up in South Africa. They have learned a lot from the South African context, but not as much from their parents about their Indian origin or background. And so they construct, interestingly, their own spirituality. You know, for example, saying love is always a spiritual aspect, but we do not necessarily refer to any kind of God or different gods, but we say there's a kind of universal spirituality that brings people together also across cultures. And this is what I refer to.
Thank you so much, Claude-Hélène, for this engaging talk with this fascinating overview of the complex situation of love in African context, especially in South Africa.